then, because the other thing I think about Ents that really shows me it's like the org itself and the way the team's set up as part of the structure of like the success is I also think this is why, I mean, we'll segue this into the Vitality discussion. I also think the other thing that really impressed me about Ents is why I even had them as a sleeper favourite in the final. Dude, the map pool looks really good. Like, they've got it mega well-rounded. They can win on all the maps that, like, no one wants to play, basically. And if people don't know, they veto Inferno and just play all the maps everyone hates. Like, that's working for them, bro. Because to segue this, as you alluded to, this is why if you notice, I'll pat myself on the back every now and then. This is why I actually was one of the only people in World Counter-Strike who was like, I'm not that sure about the Flames move. Because one, he's an inexperienced player. Like, what you're saying, and we're all doing this, is... Right, because you're in theory better than Dupree at the game, if we just drop you in the lineup, Vitality's going to be a better team and they're going to win the tournament, win the mid, all that. That's not for certain. I have to see how he plays when he gets to big matches like this. Like, Flames wasn't in those matches in OG. He was just being chilling as like the best player on a bad team. So there's that angle. And then the other angle is, one of the reasons I've always been very, very like a stickler for the idea of like 5-man lineups. I don't say like, you know, a team, and I don't talk about Fnatic and then talk about over a 4-year span. I talk about the lineup with Pronax, the lineup with Dennis, you know, like specific lineups, is because I think people really underestimate that even one player change can change your whole map pool, style, flow of the game. Because there's one thing, Maniac, to segue, that immediately changed about Vitality. Dude, when they won the major, the reason it made sense they won the major is I think they had one of the most complete map pools you'll ever see. They even were punished picking Anubis into people, if people remember. Like, the map that everyone was vetoing at that tournament. Like, they had the whole map pool. They even could win the Vertigos and the Ancients of the world if they had to. Now, with the Flames change, there's one thing immediately you saw about Vitality. Look, the rest of the players are still the same players, but the map pool is totally different now. Like, they looked a lot more limited.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And it is the trade-off that I think a lot of people probably didn't think about, which I immediately put on the table when they made that change. I said, long-term, this is a good change.
Yes.
When we look a year from now, you will probably have accomplished more with Flames than you would have with Dupree. I can see it. But in the short term, there is a very, very obvious, not an issue, but an obstacle that they're going to have to address, which is plug in Flames 1-for-1 for Dupree. And certain maps are going to work, and it's going to be fine. And certain maps, it's not going to work at all. And I think we've seen, again, I mentioned Vertigo because it happened twice against G2 and against Ents. And I think people have to realize something. I'm going to take a time just to explain it. When I say a team suffers from having a 1-to-1 change on the CT side, I'm not only talking about that players on that specific bomb side that is struggling to hold executes. I am talking about the whole logic of how you approach the CT side based on the assumption that you have that a B side is safe. We can do that setup. We can do this. I think the Vertigo game against G2 probably hurt them a lot. And when they moved against Ents, I feel like the A side was over-forcing duels. They were over-forcing the difference just to try and alleviate the pressure that wouldn't happen on the B side. And that's a systematical problem. That's when you don't, it's like trying to hold like a plate with 5 different glasses and some of the glasses are full and not the one are empty and you're trying to counterbalance the problem. And as at the end of the day, your defense doesn't make sense. So that's some of the problem that they have. I think there are still maps where Flames is going to need time to come into his own on the CT side because Apex has made it clear that he will keep some of these rotating, very impactful CT's positions. He decided that he was going to keep them, which in all fairness, that's his decision. He's being clear about it. Good to you, all the power to you. But that also means that you have to have a Flames that gets used to being sometimes a B anchor on Vertigo, sometimes shitting short on Mirage, for example. That is going to take a while. And that's why I knew Vitality wasn't going to be ready with capital R going into Cologne. Like, if they were going to win it, this was going to be through some crazy individual bravery moment where everything comes together, or you make it to the grand final and then you enter the realm of we're playing a different kind of Counter-Strike now. This is just about, you know, men and just going there, being ready to go to battle. But yeah, short term, of course it's going to be trade-off. And what I've seen from Vitality was, unfortunately, what I had expected.
Because I think this leads to a really interesting question. This is also one thing I do get a bit annoyed about at the moment in Counter-Strike, is people they sometimes ask the questions, but they don't answer them. Like, here's the obvious question that has to be answered after Cologne. I noticed, like I implied before, it's conspicuous no one was doing this with G2. Like, where are all the people like, right, well, since G2 won that event, I can guarantee they win the next event and the next, you know, that should be the logical follow-on. Because the real problem I have right now, if you look at the current landscape, is Vitality isn't the Vitality that won the major. They're this different version with Flames now. Heroic, by the way, it looks weaker than they've looked for like, what, a year now or something crazy. Like, they really look like they've dropped off. FaZe Clan, they can be either awesome or completely just non-existent and drop out against anyone. Na'Vi looks really sus. Like, aside from, maybe this new Cloud9 a lot of people are hyped about, like, there isn't even one team that anyone can say is number one. Like, who is number? No. Kassad said it in a way that's a Kassad way of saying it, where he went like, Heroic is not top one because no one is top one, which is like, this is why we love you, Kassad, because that doesn't make any sense. Someone logically has to be number one. But, you know, we know what you mean by that. We know what you mean by that. And so, in some ways, that's why we need characters to say things in those ways. So the question is, who is number one? Like, and here's the thing, here's the key context. I don't mean HLTV ranking, or you make it. I mean, for real, if someone puts a gun to your head, who are you taking as number one now? Who's your number one? Whew. It's a pretty hard question, I think.
Yes.
There's so many angles you can go in, right?
To be fair, it is. To be fair, it is a pretty hard question. I would probably still favor Heroic, although that was a catastrophe what happened in Cologne. It's just a question of like how much value you put onto this, whatever happened against Astralis. I think that is the main conversation, and I think there's a whole lot more than meets the eye in that Danish derby. Now we've become the big brothers. You are now our smaller brothers or younger brothers, and I think there was a whole lot of mental game going into this, and they completely fell on that one. I think I would probably still have a Heroic. Because if I say G2, that means I'm relying on more of that kind of performances. We've already established we can't really do that. And I think the closest behind the Heroic might still be Vitality. And then there's ENCE. To me, that would be, like I said, like 4 teams is Heroic, Vitality, G2, ENCE. I cannot tell you right now who is number one. I do not have an answer that I can back up firmly and tell you this is why that team is the best in the world right now. I don't think there is a case to be made that strongly for teams. I think it depends on what is it that you want to value? What is it that you want to put the emphasis on? And it also strongly relies on what you expect to happen in the next few weeks. Like, yeah, if you tell me G2 is going to play the same, then sure. Yeah, they're best team in the world. Yeah. Now, please show me why they would exactly play like that. I think that's the issue that we have.
Because that's the other problem as well. It's like, in my opinion, the shortlist is obvious. It is, like you say, it's like Vitality, G2, Heroic, maybe ENCE. And then here's the problem. You can put FaZe in, but it's just as an outsider at this point in time. They don't consistently go to the final, win the tournament. Like, there's a reason why no one has them as the number one team. The real issue is you're just picking a criteria that you boost over the others, I think, to pick this. Because, like, Heroic probably is, on paper, the most well-rounded team, but like I say, I think if anything, they might be getting worse for the choking shit, mate. Like, now, this is why I actually do think, I don't just do this for the show. I did actually, it left a bad taste in my mouth when they won that Blast Maniac, and they were like, lol, we made up for losing the major. I said, no, you didn't though, bro, you know what I mean? Like, look, you did do something. I want to give you props. Like, what it showed is what we all hope, which is you are good enough to win the tournament. But actually, when you win only the Blasts, if anything, it's the opposite implication. It actually implies that, well, then why don't you win the major? Why don't you win Katowice and Cologne and these massive... So that's my problem with the Heroic one. It's like, essentially, if I have to pick a team to make top 8, they're probably my number one team. But if I actually have to go in a final, if anyone sees me when I do betting, I love fucking betting against this team because they're going to break down so many times. So Heroic's hard. G2 won. It's like what we just said, like, yeah, if everyone pops off, they can win. But it's like, even that shouldn't happen every tournament. Here's the thing. I low-key actually think I probably have to pick Vitality. Because the reason why is this. Even though they definitely have a lot of work to do still on the map pool and integrate Flames, the difference is, and I do think this actually works as an angle, I always say to people, if all factors are equal or comparable, I usually just default to who I actually think has the better star player. Because essentially, like, I know it's a meme because we're going to have this conversation in a future episode, but in general, I can actually rely on Zero in most of these matches to be the best player. And if you have the best player, plus other fact they have Spinks as an amazing rifler, they have very experienced players. In general, look, they're still a solid team. They're certainly far from bad. And they still take, like, here's a good sign if you're a Vitality fan. It still takes a very good performance to beat Vitality. They don't just, like, bend over themselves and go ahead. Like they play you in the game. They make it like there's a reason why some Pius had to have like an absolutely cracked out performance to win that match. Like it wasn't like he just turned up and put 10 kills on the board. So I think if I have to plump for them, I probably do have to pick Vitality. But as you can see, it's still this might be one of the most uncertain times ever in Counter-Strike. I'm struggling to find out when there was. This is why I don't. The other angle about the Huxley one that drives me a bit crazy is you don't have to agree with all the specifics, but I actually think Richard, when he said that point, like at the end of last year, was on point, which is it's just at the top end of the scene. Like these aren't the teams that history will remember. Like, you know, when G2, like you said, had that run earlier this year where they had the streak at kind of and then right afterwards Vitality had their streaks and on paper these are some of the greatest streaks of all time, but I don't know that anyone's really going to have these teams top 10 at the end of CSGO history, if you know what I mean. So it's just at the top end, it's just not like super solidified who's number one. It's quite interesting though. Like Game is it's wide open, right? It's completely wide open, mate.
I agree with you. I think there's two angles on that. One angle that I usually do, like a mental gymnastic I usually do, is what team would I, based on a gut feeling, trust in a grand final? That to me is a filter. And at that, I think G2 has a really high score. Whenever I see G2 in a grand final, nowadays with these players, I know that they're ready to put up the fight. Like they're not just going to roll over. They're not going to let the moment just overtake them and disappear. I know that. I have the same kind of feeling with Vitality. Like put Vitality in the grand final, I think they'll be ready to have a fight. But another thing that I wanted to say, another angle that I have on Vitality is that even though they're very clearly not a finished product, I think Cologne has already provided some proof of concept for this lineup. Like how it can look like on the T side, which is an obvious one-to-one plug with Flames, very aggressive in Dupree's shoes. How on a couple of maps the setups make sense. Like for example, like the city side of Inferno looks super, super solid. But like Spain's Magicians, I won the A side as long as Apex and Flames don't get abused. But I think Flames is really ready to get into fights whenever Apex tells him to. So in terms of proof of concept, I've already seen quite good things from Vitality. And I have no reason to believe that the floor is going to get lower at other events. And I think that's why I rate them still very highly, is that I have no reason to believe they're going to just bomb out in group stage next event. I think their floor is really, really high at the moment. And some of the works that they have to do is probably going to be the difference between semi-final, final, trophy. Like this is the work that they have to do because not everybody in the scene has Ence's map pool to go and challenge Vitality and poke where they have weaknesses. Not everybody has that kind of map pool. Ence for that is a beautiful prime example of what can fuck up Vitality, and that happened. Not everybody has that, so I still have a strong confidence in Vitality to make deep runs at events, even with the roster change on short term.
It's why, to me, like I teased it there, but in some ways, the way that the Cloud9 story went for IM Cologne, where like Axel just arrives off the plane and plays the quarters, and then even the way they played that quarter maniac, like the first map was like whatever, but then map 2 was getting like so close to getting really spicy, but then they just lost, so you didn't get to see the map 3, you didn't get to see would they win. Like in some ways that was like the wrestling tease of like we're all ready for the big event now. Like in some ways like that teased us extra because it allowed you to believe if you watch just that one quarter, like maybe they actually could be insane. This could be fucking so. But if we haven't seen the whole event, like if they've actually just had the whole event and be whatever, like it would have cooled us down. So to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content, well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.